When it comes to slavery, the idea of former slaves becoming slave owners seems unheard of. This makes the story of Anthony Johnson all the more intriguing. His story defies expectations, challenges historical narratives, and unveils a remarkable journey through time. From his enslavement to his shocking achievement as the first black slave owner and the cruelty he subjected his slave to, we'll embark on an eye-opening exploration of this enigmatic figure. Join us as we unravel the untold aspects of his life, exploring the complexities of power, identity, and how this mysterious black man turned from a slave to a slave owner. So prepare to be intrigued and enlightened as we shed light on this lesser-known chapter of history. The identity of Anthony Johnson remains shrouded in mystery to this day, despite false claims linking him to the image of this man. Historical records firmly establish that the man in this picture is not Anthony Johnson, but Lewis Hayden, a former slave, influential politician, and abolitionist who played a pivotal role in liberating black slaves from the clutches of slavery. Lewis Hayden presents a stark contrast to the individual we're discussing today and bears no resemblance to him whatsoever. While no photographic evidence captures Anthony Johnson's appearance, historical records unequivocally affirm his existence as a black slave who ultimately became a slave owner. Anthony Johnson's biography commenced in the early 17th century when he was born in Angola, southwestern Africa. Details regarding his exact birth date and early life remain a mystery. However, historical accounts suggest that he was captured as a child by Portuguese slave traders who named him Antonio before selling him into the Atlantic slave trade. In 1621, he found himself in the hands of an Englishman in the colonial settlement of Jamestown, Virginia, marking the beginning of his life as an enslaved individual in the English colonies. Growing up as a slave in Virginia was undoubtedly challenging for Anthony, as he was fondly called Antonio a Negro. He endured the cruelty and hardships that characterized the life of a slave and was subjected to the grueling labor and treated as mere property. In a stroke of fate, Anthony Johnson's life took a major turn when he became an indentured slave to a man named Haley Bennett. The Bennetts were a rich white family who owned tobacco plantations where Anthony worked for nearly 12 years. Despite his status as a slave, Anthony Johnson experienced a unique situation under the ownership of the Bennetts. They granted him a small plot of land where he cultivated tobacco and corn. He was also privileged to own several herds of cattle. This exceptional circumstance allowed him to gain some level of autonomy and likely own certain skills during this period which would prove to be crucial in shaping his future. The reason Anthony had these privileges was that during the early years in Virginia and Maryland, enslaved individuals were treated as servants, and their status did not always entail a lifetime of servitude. Surprisingly, Africans were occasionally granted more privileges during this period compared to the later, harsher years of slavery. In the 1630s, Anthony Johnson married a woman called Mary, or Maria Negro. Like Anthony, Mary was also of African descent and was brought to the English colony of Virginia as an enslaved individual. Not much detailed information is available about Mary's background or early life, but historical records indicate that she and Anthony were brought together during their time of enslavement. From slavery to freedom. Anthony Johnson's rise to freedom was through a combination of circumstance and tenacity. During his time working on Haley Bennett's tobacco plantation, Anthony Johnson may have demonstrated valuable skills and resourcefulness. It is believed that Johnson's aptitude for agriculture and his ability to navigate the colonial society caught the attention of Haley, leading to a unique opportunity to negotiate his freedom. The reasons behind this manumission are not entirely clear, but Johnson likely negotiated or worked for his release either by fulfilling some form of service or perhaps acquiring some funds to buy his freedom as an indentured servant. Regardless of the specifics, Johnson's attainment of freedom marked a profound moment in his life as he transformed from an enslaved individual into a legally recognized free Negro. And the first thing he did after his freedom was to change his name from Antonio to Anthony Johnson. His wife Mary Johnson was also able to secure her freedom, and they both began to forge a life together as a free couple. Despite facing different obstacles as freed black couples, their determination and hard work paid off as they managed to acquire land and establish themselves as landowners, which was an extraordinary achievement for people of African descent during that era. Together, Anthony and Mary had 4 children, adding to the family's prosperity and prominence within the local community. Their union represented not only a partnership in love, but also a partnership in building a life of autonomy and success. This achievement was rare for a person of African descent in the time when slavery was deeply entrenched in colonial society. Johnson's transition from enslavement to freedom marked a turning point in his life, and he sought to carve out a new path for himself and his family. How Anthony Johnson grew his fortune. Anthony Johnson owned a plantation in the colony of Virginia during the 17th century after acquiring a patent for 250 acres of land. As a landowner, he cultivated various crops, with tobacco being one of the most significant cash crops of the time. Tobacco was a lucrative commodity in the American colonies and played a vital role in the colonial economy. Virginia, in particular, became a major tobacco-producing region, and many landowners, including Anthony Johnson, focused their efforts on cultivating and harvesting this profitable crop. Tobacco cultivation was labor-intensive, and Johnson likely relied on the labor of enslaved individuals to work on his farm. Enslaved labor was the backbone of the tobacco industry, and the harsh conditions endured by enslaved populations played a crucial role in the success of these plantations. In addition to tobacco, Johnson might have grown other crops for subsistence and trade. Corn, wheat, vegetables, and fruit were common crops cultivated for domestic consumption in local markets. Anthony Johnson's role as a landowner and prosperous farmer enabled him to accumulate wealth and achieve prominence in the colonial community. As a free African-American landowner, his accomplishments were exceptional, as they defy societal norms and confront racial prejudices of the time. However, it's crucial to acknowledge that his prosperity was built on the exploitation of enslaved labor, which remains a tragic aspect of his legacy and history of colonial America. From slave to slave owner. Anthony Johnson's journey to becoming the first black slave owner in colonial America is a complex and controversial one. With his financial success, Anthony Johnson had the means to acquire indentured servants to work for him. And this journey began in the 1650s when he obtained the services of an African indentured servant named John Cassar. John Cassar had been brought to Virginia to work for a specific period to pay off his debt or fulfill an agreement. However, a dispute arose between Johnson and Cassar over the terms of his service. Cassar claimed that he had completed his indentured service and was entitled to his freedom, but Anthony Johnson disagreed, arguing that Cassar's service was not limited by time. Cassar ran away to Johnson's neighbor, Robert Parker, and skillfully convinced him and his brother George that he was an indentured servant entitled to freedom after his term's completion. Parker was convinced by Cassar's claims, and he brought him home to work on his tobacco field, which sparked a heated dispute between Parker and Anthony. When faced with the reality of a white neighbor attempting to take away his servant, Anthony Johnson took a decisive stand and sought legal recourse to protect his property. The legal dispute was brought before a court in Northampton County, Virginia, and in 1655, after a long legal battle, the court made a landmark decision in favor of Anthony Johnson, ruling that John Cassar was indeed Johnson's permanent slave, and therefore his lifetime property. This court decision marked a significant moment in American history. It was the first recorded instance of a person of African descent being declared a lifelong slave by judicial ruling. This legal precedent also established the foundation of the perception of slavery based on race in the American colonies, and eventually in the United States, where freed African Americans were able to own fellow Africans as slaves. The fact that a former slave like Anthony Johnson could legally own another human being raised moral questions and complicated the narrative surrounding the institution of slavery. Johnson's journey from slavery to freedom and then to slave ownership highlights the complexities and contradictions of early colonial society, where the lines between the oppressors and the oppressed were blurred. His final years. In the 1660s, the circumstances for free blacks, including Anthony Johnson, were becoming increasingly difficult in the predominantly white-oriented Virginia. Anthony felt the impact of these changes and made a significant decision to sell his property along the Pungatee Creek and relocate his entire family to Somerset County, Maryland. In Maryland, Anthony Johnson purchased new land and established his farm, which he proudly named Tony's Vineyard. Tragically, Johnson passed away shortly after moving to Maryland, leaving behind his beloved wife, 2 sons, John and Richard, and 2 daughters, along with their respective families. Mary Johnson, his devoted wife, survived until 1672. In the following years, from then until 1706, records show that the Johnson family lived on adjoining farms, one of which was aptly called Angola. This period offers insights into the family's life and experiences as they continue to navigate the complexities of their time. While Johnson's case represents a disheartening aspect of history, it remains essential to study and understand how such events contributed to shaping the course of American history. His story challenges us to confront the uncomfortable truths of the past and remind us of the complexities surrounding the pursuit of freedom, power, and identity during such a tumultuous era. It is essential to recognize that slavery was a deeply oppressive and dehumanizing system, and the treatment of slaves was characterized by extreme cruelty and exploitation. Although Anthony Johnson's specific actions towards his slave were not well documented, slavery during that time was characterized by systemic abuse and oppression, regardless of the individual owner. Anthony Johnson's journey from slavery to freedom and later becoming a slave owner remains a complex and paradoxical tale. It challenges our understanding of the era as it sheds light on deep-noted issues of race and inequality that continue to shape the United States and the world today.